property developer who a few years ago said young people could afford to buy their own property if they weren't wasting it all in cafes having smashed avocado. I actually think there is some truth in what Bernard says. Intergenerational conflict came out quite a bit in our study. Definitely some people that are extremely frugal and extremely motivated. There are those people. There's a lot of discretionary spend happening. Honestly, it depresses me to hear a 25-year-old talking about having Botox. Why would you just waste your money? There's so many better things you could do. People are just living so much in the moment that they're not sufficiently considering their future needs. It's a natural human bias to focus on the here and now. As a rule, we don't put enough importance on our future self. One day the future is going to arrive. When you're in your 60s and 70s, you're going to have to live with the consequences of choices you made in your 20s and 30s.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Australian Property Investment Podcast. Look, on my journey, talking to a number of clients, whether that's existing clients, I'm talking some of our people that are parents with kids, younger Australians that are trying to get in. Yes, we speak a lot about investing in property. There's a large cohort of Australians that also want to buy their own home. And the topic of housing affordability and home ownership is something that's not going away. So I don't want to be tone deaf and I don't want to shy away from having this conversation, which is why we're looking at guests. One research paper that came out really caught my attention is something that was written by Professor Elizabeth Sheedy and really talks about younger Australians, the aspirations, the ambitions around home ownership. We're going to unpack this and talk to Professor Sheedy about this and go through, I guess, all the research that you put together. One of many research papers that you put together as well. I do want to give some context to our chat. You are a homeowner. You are a property investor. I don't think you're anti-property investment by any means, but we're going to have a very balanced conversation of qualitative, quantitative data that you've undertaken as well, based on your years of being in this field, research as well. And being an expert in household finance and risk management, when you lecture at university and you're teaching the Master of Banking and Applied Finance at Macquarie, you definitely come with runs on the board and a track record. And I'm really honoured to have you join us on the show. So welcome on, Professor Sheedy.
Oh, thanks, Aaron. It's an honour for me to be invited.
Oh, thank you, mate. So look, we're gonna dig a few layers deep on the research that you've done. You've already got your laptop up, fired up there, ready to go. It's a funny world. You know, we were speaking before. You studied at your undergrad at UNSW, where I cut my teeth as an undergrad many years ago, and you've gone on to have an academic career. You know, going Macquarie University, did your PhD there. Throughout your years of experience, lecturing, teaching, researching as well, what's something that comes up that maybe surprises you around home ownership and data?
Well, look, I think what this, in general, I'd say, risk management is a big blind spot for people. And, owning a home is a risky business. I think one of the many interesting things that has come out of this study is just, I think a lot of younger people, they're actually quite naive about the risks of property ownership. Another really interesting thing that came out of this study is just that, in fact, if we, comparing people who are property owners versus those who are not, the financial well-being of the owners was actually on average lower, which I think is probably a big surprise for us in Australia, because we tend to think home ownership is a ticket to financial well-being. But certainly for a lot of people, particularly in the early years of home ownership, it's a very, very tough road involving a lot of sacrifice. I think that's got a lot of interesting consequences.
So, hearing that blows my mind because you would associate home ownership with unlocking a level of achievement. Maybe it's personal fulfillment, definitely a phase in life where you go, hey, this should be celebrated, and you're amongst the privileged few that get to call Australia home with owning a piece of real estate. What is it around, and risk management gets thrown around a lot as a word, but if you kind of define that, what would you say risk management is, and most people underestimate that, for example?
Well, look, I think some risks are quite well understood. So, for example, people tend to be quite well aware of interest rate risk.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of talk in the media about mortgage rates and what they're doing.
Beautiful.
Especially every month, or every couple of months now when the Reserve Bank decision comes out. But they are the other risks. So I'm talking about things like build quality. I'm talking about property damage, perhaps due to weather events, and that's getting worse and worse, right,
Absolutely.
with climate change. So, people having major repair bills and finding themselves underinsured, and these are some of the bad having issues with dealing with strata complexes, dealing with issues in strata. Just some of the challenges of maintenance. I actually think there's a bit of a, there's such that people view home ownership often with quite rose-coloured glasses, and then
because you'd be saying, "Hey, those are champagne problems reserved for homeowners. Like you should be welcoming those problems."
Yeah, but not everyone's equipped to deal with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I mean personally, I can. And probably lots of property owners can, but I think there's a fair slab of people around that actually they're not very well equipped to deal with all that stuff. So it's so there's some people who have actually purchased properties, and it's just been for them it's been a really horrible experience. They've had terrible experiences with builders. It can be pretty, and I guess that's one of the issues with property as an asset class, is that it's hard to be diversified, right? I mean, unless you're a billionaire, most people just have one or two properties. And so, you could get really unlucky and find yourself in a property that's a total dud, because a builder did a bad job, or, something like that.
It's also laid on top of that because, and you speak about financial resilience, which we'll come to later, the arduous process of getting a loan approved, and that doesn't go smoothly or seamlessly. And I'll put our hand up and say, on our watch, it can never be a perfect client experience, nor is it guaranteed. The dealings with a real estate agent or conveyancer, there's so many parties along the way, building and pest, things that aren't picked up in a report that then become an issue post-settlement, for example, once you're living in the home. Neighbours, you buy into a neighbourhood, or like you said, strata building, and there's things that you want to do or thought you could do, renovations that then have to go through approval process. As you're talking about, I can definitely feel like there's conversations that I can't, and there's a lot of scar tissue that exists for a lot of homeowners. But then who do you tell that to? Because it's like, you can't exactly say, woe is me, when you've been one of the privileged few to actually get keys to your own home as well. Yeah. So no one's heart bleeds for you. And I guess that does feed into a bit of that financial resilience, which is, hey, toughen up, have some cement and keep going. But yeah, like you said, not everyone is equipped with the right personal tools or resources. Yeah. Excellent. So as you went on this journey, and I'm going to bring up the article, Young Adults and the Housing Challenge, this research piece, which is initially how I came across you. Take us through, for those that haven't read it, and we'll include links to the article as well. What can you expect out of that research piece? Yeah,
so what we're doing here is delving in. I think it's well established that home ownership rates are plummeting in the younger age cohorts.
Yes, spot on.
And so I think it's also probably pretty established that declining affordability is a major fundamental cause of that. Okay, no question. However, one thing that's a bit up in the air is there another thing going on as well? And is there a possibility that in this younger age group that people's attitudes to home ownership are a little bit different from my generation? So I'm a boomer. What we did in this study was to interview people in the age group from 18 to 40. Okay. So going right through from, youngsters to people that are building their careers, settling down with a life partner. A number of them had become homeowners, but trying to understand what the whole experience was like. I should emphasise this is qualitative research. We had 70 participants, and when in a qualitative study like this, what we're going for is depth rather than breadth.
Okay.
So we got to know these people really, really well. We actually interviewed them every fortnight for a number of months.
Oh, right.
The homeownership wasn't the only issue we discussed with them. But we kind of built up quite a relationship of trust. So we know pretty much everything there is to know about these 70 people as far as their finances go.
Yeah, certainly. And so I guess sitting in that group of 70, and you take someone from 18 to 40.
Yeah.
What's the median? The median first-home buyer age is 37.
Is that right?
Yeah. So I've done a lot of my research, because a lot of this research I think would be mirrored and echoed in my book that I put out, which is particularly geared towards first-home buyers.
Yeah.
And it definitely has that methodology and that research around declining rates of home ownership, particularly for younger Australians. I also think there's a danger in the conversation around comparing where we are today with when boomers bought their first home. Very different times. Again, I sit somewhere in the middle, but I don't think it's fair to compare. They're very different times. Where Australia is now versus where it was, 40, 50 years ago, for example, very different era. I think and your research really touches on it, there is still an attitude around home ownership and rent money is dead money, for example. So that still kind of lingers. I think parents project a large amount as well onto their kids. So they're brought up with this idea, rent money is dead money, or you got to pay your mortgage off as quickly as possible. Investing is dangerous. A lot of our listeners, if you're picking up what I'm putting down, this is a product of environment as well. And you haven't achieved until you bought your own home, which can really fly in the face for a lot of younger Australians who went to uni, now have a giant HECS debt. And when I say young, we're talking about the average first-home buyer age being 37. There are people older than that that are still yet to buy their own home, and they're feeling deflated or dejected that they haven't got into the market. So let's unpack a little bit of your research, because I'm very curious to find out, because you had, I guess, different archetypes of people that were sitting of the research that you did there as well. So why don't you just share a little bit about what you found?
Well, certainly there's still a big group of people that aspire to home ownership. And the reasons for that, I think are pretty obvious and well known. Okay, so they don't enjoy the rental experience. They want to have an asset that's going to grow in value. They want to be able to personalise their home. So all of those things that we get all that. What we found more interesting was to sort of focus in more on the people that were more questioning. Okay, and in some cases even rejecting home ownership as a life goal, despite on paper having the financial capacity to own. Okay, so we're talking about people with pretty good incomes, or it's certainly potential incomes. So people that are currently uni students studying law. That in past generations, there wouldn't have been any question that they would be a potential homeowner. And people like that saying, "No, it's not for me." That was what we really wanted to delve in. So really focusing on those more non-traditional attitudes, if you will. And I think, for property investors, I think this has got enormous implications, right? Because the fact that there does seem to be now this significant minority of people that are much more negative about home ownership. They're going to be very long-term renters. So I think it heightens the importance of property investing. Okay. So, but I think it's a different type of market. So it's the market for people that want long tenure. They want to be able to. They don't want to feel like the risk of eviction every couple of months. They want more stability. They want to rent in a way that maybe has been different from the traditional, like, student share house.
Also, you get like 1 year rental agreements, for example. A lot of countries overseas have much longer rental agreements. I see this argument all the time come up, rent vesting. Rent vesting is the idea, like you just said, they rent where they want to live, they buy where they can afford to buy and build a property portfolio that way. Got no qualms with that. I think it's horses for courses in terms of that strategy, and plenty of our clients rent vest with great success as well. But it's that instability or the insecurity that comes going with any given notice. They could be out of that rental and they've got maybe 30, 60 days to find a new property, and they've got to uproot and move. And that's probably the only thing that looms over them. Going at any given point, we could be given this letter, and if only we had slightly longer lease terms, and they can be negotiated. I just think it's the exception to the rule as opposed to the rule. Yeah.
So, if you like, I could talk to you about some of the case studies, because I think it's when you get into the stories of the people that it all, that's when you start to get the real insight as to, what's actually going on here.
Yeah.
So just 1 second. My computer's gone to sleep.
No, that's cool.
Okay. So I'll start with the story of Linda.
Yep.
By the way, these are all pseudonyms, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Linda, who's age 37, and she's one of those people that has had a really bad ownership experience, this risk thing that we were talking about earlier. So she bought a property with a former partner. The relationship broke up. She bought her partner out, and she was renting out the property. Right. She herself moved to another state where she was working. Then what happened was there was a freak storm, and the roof of her house was wrecked. It was going to be like a $30,000 job to replace the roof. Insurance came nowhere near covering it. And so she was left in this situation that the house was unrentable, so she was paying both mortgage and paying her own rent.
Yeah.
And she was facing the mortgage cliff. So, couldn't have a worse combination of circumstances. And from Linda's point of view, it's just become a really scarring experience, and she just wants to sell and has no plans to buy again. She wants freedom, I guess, because she's currently single. She just doesn't want to be tied down. She, in her own words, she might want to live in a bus for 12 months. So she wants extreme, radical freedom. Okay? And this idea of freedom, I think, is a bit of a theme that comes through with a lot of people, and perhaps is a little bit different from, the traditional way of, I think for a lot of people, me included, home ownership is about stability and security and those sort of things. But there is a group of people that's not a big pull, okay? For them, flexibility and freedom is the big driver.
Yeah. Sitting behind that, you've also got, well, now I'm chained to my job, so it's effectively a golden handcuff because I've got to pay this mortgage, so I can't chase a dream, for example. I'll look at my if you guys have heard my little brother Sean come on, my younger brother Sean started a whole range of restaurants and venues. And he could never have done that if he had giant mortgages to pay. You couldn't effectively chase your dreams because you're constrained by that as well.
Yeah, that's right. And there's quite a few people around that want to try entrepreneurial pursuits, or
take a career break, like travel, caravan, whatever it's going to look like. Yeah. What that definition of freedom is to someone. But I think it's also like the notion of a 30-year mortgage can feel a bit like it's a death sentence.
It's a prison, yeah. And that specific wording came up. So Patrick is another really interesting guy, age 38. He and his partner rent in the eastern suburbs. He's on good money he's in sales.
Yeah.
Most certainly could afford to buy. But he's, some of his quotes are really telling. He says, life is short. I think you should enjoy yourself. So it's very much that idea of living in the moment. And, he talking about, the French, the word mortgage comes from the French for a death contract.
Yeah.
And that's several times he raised that point. And he was just so avoidant of, I'm not buying a house. It's not for me. That's how he sought. So this very strong debt avoidance came through from a number of people, really seeing a mortgage as a prison. And as I've really reflected on that, because I found it quite shocking.
Yeah.
Initially, believe me, I've had plenty of mortgages in my life, but I think maybe what's going on here is that the mortgages are so big now. Okay, and so you might be able to pay the interest, but at some point you've got to pay off the principal, right?
Right.
And if you're paying off $1 million mortgage, wow. That's a huge thing, right?
I laugh because I've got plenty of mortgages myself.
Yeah. And I think, so it's kind of like it just the idea of a mortgage is so much bigger now than what it ever used to be. And whereas I think in the past, you would know better than me that typically, people would pay off a mortgage in 7 to 10 years, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's way. I mean, there was ways to rapidly repay your mortgage,
but that can't be happening now. So you're really looking.
You'd have to have a very strong adjustable income, i.e., self-employed bonuses. I mean, this guy's in sales, so you get commissions or bonuses.
Yeah,
you need that extra lump sum. If you're fixed salary and you've borrowed and your borrowing's pegged to that salary, you need. You can't outpace the system because our cost of living is increasing. So salary, you've got your take home, which is a fixed figure, pie, let's call it a pie chart. And out of that, you've got your living expenses. Out of that, you got, essential costs, your mortgages, and that discretionary income particularly with the last 13 rate rises, that discretionary is really shrunk in that pie chart. So I can understand, and I'll have conversations with what was his name, Patrick?
Yeah.
I'll have conversations with Patrick, and I'd be very curious to find out if they have kids, and I think that's probably a real turning point for a lot of couples. It's like once they decide to have children, now we want the stability and security for our family, and it's almost like what Patrick wants. Goes out the window to a certain degree, going, hey, mate, you don't really get a chance. And we're starting a family. You got to lead this family. And
I think you raised a really good point, Aaron, because, sometimes people are partnering and having children later than what they used to.
Right.
And I think people sometimes find it difficult to imagine what that life is going to be like and just how different it's going to be. At the time we interviewed him, he did have an 8-month-old,
right?
And I got the impression that his partner was a lot keener than him. So to own.
Yeah, and I feel it's a really part of a nesting mindset as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. Then I think there's a really interesting phenomenon that we really should talk about is the concept, particularly with the younger ones. So I've got a participant we call Jessica, who's 24. Yeah. So I'm still pretty young.
Very young. Yeah.
And she's definitely saying she eventually wants to own her own home, but she's kind of very much kicking the can down the road. She's certainly not starting to save for a deposit. For her, it's all about experiences and travel.
As it should be for a 24-year-old. I'm going to show you. As it should be for a 24-year-old. Like, honestly, there's two ways you can go about it. I mean, I feel like we've had buyer's agents that have come on that really got into the market very early. They're almost very left of centre. That they bit the bullet as a 24-year-old, worked their absolute socks off to get into the property market. And then you got someone like Jessica, is it Jessica, right? 24, maybe finished uni, decent, role after uni, and now has got some discretionary income to go travelling. It's like, when else in your life are you going to get this opportunity to be young, free, and a traveller? It's like, I feel they're almost guilted into going, mate, you've got to get into the markets as quick as possible, property market, and then bang, immediately come on those handcuffs to go, Well, now traveling comes secondary to paying your mortgage, and you got to be responsible because if you don't do it, this window of time will close and the market will forever lock you out. And I feel like, I'm all for. We're big advocates for buying investment properties. That's why we're here. But I'm also for living life a little bit on your own terms. And I feel like people's projections of what you could be doing can weigh heavily on someone as well.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Agency really comes into this. Agency really weighs into this conversation. So run your own race. I mean, like, I do get a little bit philosophical on this. The numbers are one thing. Run your own race. Life is a long game. Life is a long game. You play your cards right, you can have everything at the right time. You just can't have it all at 24.
That's probably true. And maybe that's a difference, Sharon, because I bought my first property at 24.
I would be, I would be at 27 or 26,
So maybe that is something that is, has become harder now for the current generation. So there's a couple of other people.
So that conversation will come up. Like you watch SBS, like Inside, or is it QR? A couple of those shows, and they'll have these conversations where, with all due respect, a boomer goes, well, I bought my first property at 24. And then you have someone like Jessica in the audience going, but I don't get it. I'm 24, I'm earning $75K. I've got a $50,000 HEX debt and I can't even afford to buy in Sydney. So where do I go? And that conversation, it's like we can't agree to disagree because it's still an elephant in the room going, but how do we unlock this housing affordability? Okay, become a rent investor. And they're saying, well, I don't want to be a rent investor. I want to be a homeowner.
There's intergenerational conflict came out quite a bit in our study. And we often had a really interesting discussion based around the idea of the smashed avocado meme. Okay, I'm sure you're familiar with that. I think it was
Bernard Salt.
Yeah. Property developer who a few years ago said, young people could afford to buy their own property if they weren't wasting it all in cafes having smashed avocado. And look, having spoken to a lot of these people, I actually think there is some truth in what Bernard says. Okay, it's a mixture. So there are definitely some people that are extremely frugal and extremely motivated.
Yes.
Okay, there are those people. But
financial discipline comes into it.
Yeah. But then there's quite a bunch of people that there's a lot of discretionary spend happening, and that it undoubtedly is, getting in the way of home ownership. So honestly, it depresses me to hear a 25-year-old talking about having Botox. Why are you doing that? So, to me that just seems like, I'm 62 and I've never had Botox. Why would you just waste your money? There's so many better things you could do. And while I hear you to an extent saying about, people have to get, have some enjoyment in their 20s and do some travel, I do sometimes wonder about the extent of it. Okay. So are they, is it going on too long? Maybe. Is it going on too long? And is it, the danger is, that people are just living so much in the moment that they're not sufficiently considering their future needs, because, it's true. We think about it's a natural human bias to focus on the here and now. And as a rule, we don't put enough importance on our future self. But one day the future is going to arrive. And when you're in your 60s and 70s, you're going to have to live with the consequences of the choices you made in your 20s and 30s. So, I just wonder in some cases if people are giving enough thought to their future self. It's a balance, I guess, and ultimately it comes down to personal values. And it's not up to me or you or anyone else to tell someone what their values should be. My only question would be, have you thought through what this might mean for your long-term future? So everyone is going to have to make their own choices.
Absolutely. Look, I hear what you're saying, and it can come down to how bad do you want it as well. The parallels that I draw, and hopefully it's a good enough example for everyone to relate to. It's like saying I want to get fit. Now, there's so many ways that you can get fit. There's no one single way to do it, but you can't do that by having chocolate and eating bad and drinking, for example. That will derail your entire health plan. Same would be said for spending, for example, without a clear goal-saving strategy or a plan that what you're working towards. So, yeah, to me, when someone says they want to get into the property market and they're trying to save, and then you look at their bank statements and you go, well, actually, you could be doing a lot better job. It's like you've got to help yourself first. No one is coming to save you when it comes to home ownership. We just spoke before, had Senator Andrew Bragg come on. There are going to be so many, there's some good government initiatives, but the government can only do so much. For that state or federal can do so much. They can lead a horse to water, but you actually have to drink it as well. And I think that might be the little uppercut in this message sometimes that maybe someone needs to hear. Maybe if you're listening, you know someone that just keeps complaining about trying to get into the market, and here you are trying to level up your own journey. It's going, hey, don't listen to, because people in our circle sometimes don't listen to us. Pass this episode on, and maybe it can help someone have that helping hand to get into the property market. But thank you. And I think sometimes when you said about people that don't want to get into the property market, I feel also maybe they're cutting their nose to spite their face. And by protesting about the market, it's like, I'm going to stand firm on this. It's like, well, that property market's moving with or without you.
And, if you're going to be a really long-term renter, I guess, I can understand that some people would say, no, property ownership is not my thing. It's too much. I don't want to be in that mortgage prison. I don't want to be, I want to have the flexibility to try different jobs or different business ideas. That's all fine. I guess what I would want to say then is, well, what other strategies have you got for positioning yourself for retirement? Because, the current system of pensions and so forth, it's not really, it kind of assumes that most people are owning their own homes. So if you're going to, so probably what you need to do is, the money you're saving by not having a mortgage and paying rent, well, you probably need to take the difference and invest it in other growth assets. So
Correct.
You've spoken about rent investors, but there's a lot of other strategies, right? So you could invest some money in ETFs, or you could top up your super. So there's a lot of alternatives there, but you need to be investing in some growth assets. Correct. So that when retirement comes around, you're not eating cat food.
Well said. Well said. I think that's the part that usually it gets glazed over, which is, okay, you can rent, but that difference between your rent and possibly the mortgage, you've got to find ways to then invest that. Otherwise, that's where you're lagging behind.
Yeah, and the danger is if too much of that is going into just, enjoying the moment. Yeah.
I can't remember his name. Is it Rami Sethi? There's a guy over in the US. He's a big podcaster. He's like, buying your home's a waste of money. And that groundswell, that gets traction and movement. Again, not advocating you have to go and buy your home. I think what we're saying is invest. That will never go out of fashion. Now you have the choice whether you want to buy your home or buy investment properties, but you got to do something to move the needle on your personal portfolio. Yeah, cool. Thanks very much. I'll let you keep going.
Yeah.
Because, you've got a group there that's, say, rejecting it. Also a group that's fairly ambivalent as well in terms of like home ownership, and it's almost like if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, I'm not going to lose any sleep over it, which is a good trait. And it'll come to those that really want it. But take me through what else is the other.
So with the ambivalent people, there's some interesting ones there, like Grace, who kind of put off home ownership for a long, long time. She's a 38-year-old single lawyer, lives on the North Shore of Sydney, so definitely has capacity to own. But just really wasn't at all interested. And that was a case where her mother really, I would say, pushed her into it, really pushed her over the line. and just provided a lot of support, both guidance as well as some cash. And so she has ended up as a property investor, but she's the kind of person that would say, owning a property is a pain in the ass. She said, she really hates the fact that, she feels very tied to a job and, it's that sense of being in the mortgage prison. Yeah. So she's there, but it doesn't and she can really afford it, but she doesn't seem to derive a whole lot of enjoyment out of it, as the traditional view might suggest. So there's definitely a few people that are just saying, no, this is really something that I'm avoiding. I'm just not going there. It's not for me. Now, it is true. Some people might well change their minds, as you say, if particularly if they get a partner who has a different view. They start to nest, as you say. But it's it was very interesting to sort of see the extent of let me emphasise, it is a minority, but it's quite a significant minority of people that seem to have these quite negative views. And I think what's driving it ultimately is affordability, because people are saying, look, so when you think about home ownership, you've got to think about, what's the benefit versus the cost, and think about the risks. The balance at this point is not nearly as attractive as what it has been. Okay, so you're looking at a long period of frugality to get there. Okay, so I have. It's funny. I sometimes talk to my parents who are in their 80s, and they'll say, "Oh, when we bought our first house in the 60s, for 2 years we never went out, we never bought any clothing," and That's the thing is, I think now you're talking about a lot longer than 2 years of frugality. And also, they were married, right? If you're single, it's a lot harder to sit at home alone, being frugal. Yeah. So it is tough.
It's also not a great billboard for home ownership, right? When people when you're struggling. That's I generally, from my experience, everyone's worst case scenarios. We bought a home and now we cut back on. It's not a lavish lifestyle. We have to cut back, eat 2-minute noodles, tins of tuna. It's like they can't imagine anything worse. Michelle Obama calls it house poor, and it's like we've got the house, but we feel incredibly poor. And you're saying that there's a cost of maintenance that comes with having a home. I think there's a reality, and sometimes it's the reality shock of that. When you've gone from renting and maintenance maybe gets taken care of to all the extra bills that come with home ownership, and Bunnings every other weekend. I think there's a sense of reality that starts to emerge for homeowners, for property owners, even landlords, when they go, man, I've got tenants coming at me, I've got maintenance coming at me, I've got bills coming at me, land tax. It's not I think you said earlier, rose-coloured glasses really starts to then fade very quickly, and it's like, but no one's heart is bleeding for them. Yeah. Given that if you're lucky enough to be a homeowner in this country, then you really shouldn't be complaining is the rhetoric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So so I think all of this was, for me, it raises a lot of really interesting questions about what does this mean for the future of government policy. So I guess some of the things I'd really like the audience to really think about is, so if there is increasingly this cohort of people that don't want to be homeowners, okay, how can we justify all these government policies that are subsidising home ownership? It seems inequitable, okay? Why give all this support to one group of people and the others don't get it, okay? And, because there is a lot of, at the moment, essentially the way our fiscal policy is set up, it kind of, and our retirement policies, it kind of assumes the majority are homeowners. And I think we're going to have to increasingly question that. So I think as property owners, and, I'm one, we need to be prepared for the possibility of robust debate and, possible change in future policy.
Okay, thanks very much. One of the other things that came up is the ethical issues in investing in property. I'm curious to find out because investors, largely I guess from a lot of my conversations, I see a lot of it online, it feels like it's win-lose. Like investors will win, aspiring homeowners or first home buyers lose. And the investor conversation is, well, I'm providing accommodation for people that need. I'm providing a roof over their head. I'm a good landlord, for example, market rent, and these people need a place to rent. So therefore I'm providing a service. And the homeowners are going, well, how many properties do you need? You greedy, whatever. And it's like this back and forth conversation going, well, investors going, well, hang on, I'm not a burden on the government by becoming self-sufficient as a retiree. And then homeowners are going, well, you're pushing the prices up and I can't get into the market. And it feels like this back and forth and it feels like it's win-lose. Investors win, homeowners lose, or we have to stop the market from rising. Therefore, people can get into the market, but that comes at the loss for investors around capital growth and cash flow.
Yeah. So look, a few things about that. So I think the sort of the balance between this, we definitely need property investors, okay, and even more so in a world where people are rejecting ownership. Okay, you need someone who's going to provide the rental properties.
Yep.
Okay. So it's really important that we have property investors. I guess one interesting question to consider is it still the case that mum and dad investors are the best ones? Because we're now starting to see the growth of build for rent and, the institutional investors coming to the property market. I think that's a really interesting development. One of the advantages of institutional investors is they can have a diversified portfolio. Okay, so that helps reduce, we spoke earlier about property is incredibly risky in one sense because you can't, unless you're super wealthy, you can't really diversify very easily. But, an institutional investor could have a portfolio of hundreds of properties. And so if one or two of them are duds, it doesn't really matter, right? So they don't need such a high return. Okay.
Yeah.
You see my point?
Absolutely.
Also, another thing that I feel, one thing that, talking about the ethics of investing, yes, it's true that I think the majority of us property investors are good ethical landlords, but by golly, there are some who are not.
Oh,
and
you're spot on.
And I was so shocked with some of the rental stories that I heard. There are some horror stories out there.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the trouble is there's a real imbalance of power, right? Because, you as a renter, if the landlord's a mum and dad investor, it's very hard to do much about it. Whereas if it was a big institution, they've got reputations to manage, right? So you can, we've got social media now. Yeah. You could complain, so that because those big institutions are concerned about their reputation, I think they're going to do a better job overall of, giving tenants a good experience.
Yeah, okay.
So I think I just think for mum and dad investors, just be aware. You really, I think you need to look out for your tenants, do the right thing by them, because to the extent that you're not, I think it's just going to push more and more people in the other direction. So I don't want to rent from that kind of landlord. I prefer the build-to-rent model.
Yeah.
Another point that I would make is, how much return do you really need? I'm not. I think property investors have done very well over the last couple of decades. I'm not sure that you really need such high returns to to encourage. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think it's that hard to attract investors into the market. Okay, you could probably have significantly lower returns, and people would still invest.
You could, and yeah, this would fly in the face for a lot of investors going, but hang on, I'm setting myself up for long-term wealth or intergenerational wealth for my family, and I shouldn't be disadvantaged for taking action. I think that's definitely a big part of the conversation I have. Look, even as an investor, I'm like, you're faced with this ethical dilemma going, how much is enough? But then if I've got the means and the ability, why can't I scale and grow a portfolio, for example, because that changes my entire trajectory as well. So you can.
Well, look, I should declare, I in terms of the whole debate about negative gearing and so forth, I don't. I think negative gearing is appropriate. What I think the one thing that is problematic is the discount on the capital gains tax. Okay, because why is it? It's just too hard to justify, because why is property as an asset class treated differently to any other investment? Okay, so to me it should be a level playing field. Why should you be treated differently as an investor in shares as opposed to an investor in property? You both in both cases you're looking after your future. There's this huge advantage that's given to property investors, and I would be surprised if governments can continue to justify that.
Interesting. I'll leave that there, because I think we could go into a whole socialism versus capitalism debate, and I don't want to open that can of worms. But there's a couple more articles, research papers that you've put out. Security versus freedom. Do young adults still aspire to home ownership? Now, I feel sitting behind this, there's seasons in life. So you're young, like that 24-year-old, you're young, maybe single, renting worlds at your feet, go and explore. Then you move into like dinks, so double income, no kids. Then you move into parenthood. Then you move into maybe some people single parents. Then you move into the stage you got older kids in schools and what schooling costs as well. And then you got older kids that you're trying to help get into the market. And at that stage you may be empty nesting. We spoke about blended families before. We spoke about the bank of mum and dad as well. So take us through with that. Is that a bit of my spiel and preamble to what your research has shown up? Take us through what your insights came off the back of that piece.
Oh, look, I should clarify that it's actually the same study. It's just two different write-ups. Yeah. Cool. So the first write-up we got out sort of pretty quickly. And it's sort of more targeting an audience of people in the industry. Okay. Whereas the second paper, it's the same study, but it's actually written for an academic audience.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's not really that the findings are any different. It's just the way the paper's been written.
Thanks. I appreciate the clarification. But so we'll include it all in there. Part of my research. The last one, which I think is particularly important, particularly as you take a snapshot of like cost of living. Cost of living, I felt was a different conversation to a standard of living. Now I feel like the two have come together, and like now the conversation's one and the same, which is a higher cost of living has actually reduced our standard of living. And you talk about financial well-being in here. You talk about maybe the coping mechanisms around rising cost of living and what that means. I am very aware that it's scaled pain. So irregardless of you earning 90K or you're earning 400K, it's scaled pain, and you've lived according to that type of income band as well. But what did you show up in this article?
So this one, it's actually the same group of people, these 70 young adults, and we followed them over, we met with them regularly, and we just had a number of discussions with them on different topics. And so we had a couple of discussions with them about their experience of cost of living. So this was done in 2023 when, inflation was really crazy. It was when the interest rates were rising. And so what we were interested in is the idea of financial resilience. Okay, so traditionally it's always, people have always said, well, basically it's all about wealth and income. Okay, so obviously if you're rich, you can deal with a shock better, and undoubtedly that's true. But our question was, is there other stuff going on there? Okay, so could two people with this basically the same income and wealth have quite a different experience of the cost of living shock? And so what we were looking at is people's ability to basically change it up.
Yeah. Okay.
So so when you have a financial setback, you're going to have to do one of several things. Either you're going to have to cut back on your spending, okay, or you're going to have to find other sources of income, okay, or you're going to have to draw down on your savings, so those are the sorts of things you can do. And what was quite shocking or noticeable was just some people could cope with those sort of changes way better than others, okay? So some people could say, so, you might have to cut back on some of your socialising, for example, or find different ways of socialising that didn't involve so much money. And some people seem to have that capacity to kind of, I can, look, this is not going to be, they frame it as, look, I don't love it, but I can cope with it, it will pass, okay? Whereas other people found it much more sort of catastrophic and kind of really rocked them, okay? And, I would say in general, younger people are more financially resilient.
Yeah, okay.
So, for example, a lot of them, some of the people who were living out of home moved back with mum and dad, so they reduce their costs that way. A lot of them, one of the great strengths of the Australian economy over the last few years has just been how good the labour market is. So people have switched jobs, so they've found ways of increasing their income or they've explored side hustles. But, like things like, I can remember one lady we interviewed and she said, she was a single mother, and what really struck me was she really did lack much flexibility. That's part of, when you have kids, they take up a lot of time. It's a joy, but they take up a lot of time, and it's pretty hard to take on a second job if you've got kids to look after and you're on your own. She said, like talking about the idea of taking in a housemate. She said, I would rather sleep on the side of the road. So, there were, she just, there were certain no-go areas. We had some people, so it was kind of interesting to see, where people were able to, it came down quite a lot to psychological factors, personality traits was a big part of it. So it's, of course, wealth and income is going to be a huge determinant of your financial resilience, but there is definitely more to it. Also social capital, to the extent to which you have friends and family that can help you, whether it's through cash support or just, encouragement.
Yeah. No, I like that. Often referred to as a sleep at night factor in terms of like having a little bit of a buffer. Some can sleep with 1 week savings because I know they can bounce back pretty quickly. Others need 3-6 months, for example. Yeah. They need that extra wiggle room or extra fat just to go, mate, if the worst happens and they're just wired like that. And, no judgment, each their own, but I think as long as your sleep at night factor number, how much you need in the bank to be comfortable, have you got buffers in place if you've got multiple properties, have you got someone you can lean on, Scotty Pape Barefoot Investor Emergency Fund, whatever you call it, whatever label you're going to put on it, there just needs to be that some buffer in place that you go, right, if something happens, bill shock, whatever it's going to be, I can stand on my own 2 feet. And I think there's financial resilience, financial well-being, financial self-efficacy here as well. Everything you've spoken about, I think you don't have to go to uni to really absorb this info. I think you've condensed it down really well in an easy to understand paper. Good. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Professor Sheedy, I want to say thank you for sharing your insights and your knowledge. Like I said, I want to really broaden the topics that we've got around home ownership, housing affordability, financial well-being. This is all part of that flavor that I go, we're not here just to kind of peddle mortgages or just to go, hey, buy more properties. I think having an elevated discussion around the benefits of investing or home ownership is very much par for the course when it comes to buying real estate in Australia. And it's going to arm you with some real pieces that when people are talking about property, because this happens inadvertently to anyone you speak to on a weekend about what the plans are, where you live, are you buying? I think it gives you a bit more tools in your tool belt to have a really educated conversation around if you are investing, why are you investing? If you're buying, why are you buying? And I think crystallizing that and getting comfortable and confident in your own skin can go a very long way. So thank you very much, Professor Sheedy. I really appreciate it. If you've loved this episode, do let us know. And if you also, just a gentle reminder, if you want to be part of the accelerator community that we're launching for like-minded property investors, just hit us up with a DM and tell us accelerator and we'll include you for our next live event. Thanks very much. Talk soon.